say I was actually an artist in the prior plant cures that was in collaboration with the New York Academy of Medicine. So this is an ongoing project. And we're really grateful for Maddie for coming up with the whole concept. And thinking of plants not just as medicinal, but also helping us in ways that are just really broad as far as their healing capabilities. So I'm just going to read the general theme, and then rather than introduce pure bio style, I'm going to ask the individual panelists to just tell us about themselves and also their particular, like an anecdote or story in their relationship to plants. Okay, so first of all, as a topic, we've got this wonderful interdisciplinary panel, and the discussion is on the myriad ways that plants can teach us, heal us, and the planet. So we're in a time of increasing knowledge about plant intelligence, communication, their multiple roles and complexities. It is also a time of great climatic changes, biocultural diversity loss, deforestation, and disasters on an epic level. How can plants help us navigate these issues? What can they teach us, tell us, if we choose to listen? Okay, so to my right is James Walsh, an artist who is a participant in this exhibition. So would you like to start?
Sure. Well, yeah, a lot of my work comes from natural history, particularly the history of natural history, and it usually involves some sort of research, writing, as well as visual work. And I've been pressing plants for the last 7 or 8 years, and sort of learning to identify things. And then when it came to Sassafras, I had started working on a project about early explorers to the US, like late 1500s, early 1600s, explorers and colonists. And it turned out that Sassafras was one of the things that they were coming for in the very beginning. It was considered a cure-all for syphilis, for skin diseases, for fevers, and it was incredibly expensive in Europe. So a lot of the early expeditions to the US were funded by coming over, getting sassafras and bringing it back and selling it. So through that, I started to find sassafras all over the place. It's one of those trees that I sort of thought I knew before, but I didn't exactly know. And I found that it's pretty common. You know, it's in the parks, sometimes even on the street, all over the region. So I just sort of did research and into it through reading mostly and finding and pressing things.
James's right is Desiree Ramirez, another artist.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. It's a very long tail. So my work always is somehow engaged with nature, plants, animals. I do a lot of research, but I usually come at things in celebration of the magical relationships between plants, animals, and humans. And because I'm also a poet, my work always integrates, or usually integrates, poetry. So, for example, in the piece here, there are pages or scrims of fabric layered that have a poetry. In this particular installation, there's a whole poem that I wrote for the Magnolia called Flor de Corazon, which is about the recent discovery in 2018 of a magnolia species in Mexico that was hidden in a tropical forest.
Hello, my name is Kathy Crosby, and I'm the librarian and archivist here at the garden, and I'm the person that gets to work with all the people that come in and want to do their research or ask really fascinating questions. And so I'm always learning, and it's always thanks to the people that come to the library. I think my my life has always involved nature. I was a lucky enough kid to grow up in the woods and live near a lake and play in the swamp and make a turn at the oak and look down into the Jack in the Pulpit. So for me, it's just always been a love. But I also have the ties to my library career, mostly being in medicine and then moving to botany. So it's a nice connection for me. And like our central booking artist, I love book art. So this project really came together in a very lovely way.
Hi, everybody. Yeah. My name is Daniel Aitha, and I'm a botanist at the New York Botanical Garden. My title is Director of Conservation Outreach, and I just celebrated 25 years at the New York Botanical Garden. And I spent the first half of my career at the garden traveling around the world searching for plants that would be useful for modern medicine. So we had numerous contracts with different pharmaceutical companies at the Botanical Garden, and I went numerous countries looking for novel pharmaceutical compounds that might be useful for treating cancer, AIDS, heart disease, hair loss, erectile dysfunction, all of those kinds of things that modern pharmaceutical companies are looking for. And at some point, several years ago, it dawned on me that I knew more about the plants of Belize and the plants of the Republic of Georgia than I knew about the plants of New York City. And I thought that was wrong, something's wrong with that. And so I decided to change that and to learn more about the plants of New York City. And that led to a project in Central Park documenting all of the wild plants that grow in the park. And after about 3 years of covering every inch of Central Park, looking for every wild plant that grows in the park, making specimens of them and recording their names. And I had a wonderful opportunity for a first date with a woman who would become my wife, and proposed first that we take our first date in Central Park before I proposed to her. And she was a little bit reluctant because she knew how involved I was with the botany of Central Park, and I think she was a little worried that I might be distracted. But I promised her that I would not be focused on the plants, that it was going to be our first date, and it was going to be about getting to know one another. And we were 20 steps into the park on the west side, and this plant, I swear, like it was a vine, was just growing out, trying to grab my ankle as I walked by. It would not let me pass without acknowledging this plant. And it turns out that my future wife, Deborah, she noticed that I was paying attention to this plant, and she said, "Oh, go ahead. Why don't you just look at that plant? I know that you need to do that." So I went over and took a closer look, and the plant turns out to be new for Central Park, and it's very rare in New York City. It's an emerging invasive species, the wild yam, and it has the potential to become a very serious pest in New York City. So I just had to take a picture of the plant and upload that to iNaturalist and get a picture, and I sent a message to my colleague and begged her to go and get a specimen of this plant before it got pulled up, right? So, but not to take too much time, I hope, to go back a little bit how I became how my relationship with plants developed was because I think because I was born in South America and my first language was Spanish, and I moved to the United States when I was 10, and being not a native English speaker and being always from a different place, my family moved around a lot, that I was always the new kid, always the one that talked funny, had horn-rimmed glasses, and got didn't fit in with the new, being the new kid in school. And so wherever I went, the plants were always accepting and always very generous and non-judgmental. And I felt that a relationship with the plants developed wherever I went, that I knew that I would have friends no matter where I went, that the plants were always going to accept me no matter what. And so as a child, I spent a lot of time outdoors and always, you know, related to the plants, and I guess developed a relationship with them, and fortunately that turned into a career, which I've enjoyed 25 years here in New York City. And so now my wife, with the woman who became my wife now, says that the plants talk to me, and she knows what she says because she witnessed it herself on our very first date. And so I'm really excited to participate in this discussion, because I think we really need to learn to be able to communicate with the other organisms on this planet which we share, because our not only does it enrich our lives, but I think our survival now depends on it, that we need to be able to relate to the other organisms and protect them and care for them in the way that is going to preserve their existence on the planet. And to the extent that we can engage with the other creatures on the planet, our longevity on the planet will be assured. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Joanne, and I work at Brooklyn Botanic Garden. I am the Access and School Programs Coordinator. Access meaning that we have a great initiative to make the garden more accessible to people with disabilities. I'm also the resident horticultural therapist. I finished my certificate at NYBG as well. And I'd like to share with you a little story that happened actually recently, which really solidified how I felt about horticultural therapy. The two areas that I'm interested in working with are people with dementia and also children with autism. And we have two programs like that here at the garden, which one of them was already started, and the other one, the Memory Tour, which was something that I started back in 2016, that has become very popular. And it's for people with dementia and their caregivers. And we have been doing this program once a month, maybe a couple of times a month if we have a group come. And it's been really very satisfying, really very rewarding for everyone. But there were a couple of assisted living services that came by and said, you know what, we can't really bring out people here because the average age is maybe 90. But we would love if you could come to our facility and do a presentation there and maybe bring some, bring the garden to us. So we put together a PowerPoint presentation. We packed up 20 different plants and we brought them over to a facility. And this one facility that we went to, we did our PowerPoint presentation. Then we set up like a table like this with plants that were very sensory, plants that smelled really good, that felt really good. And we invited all of the participants to come around and we would talk about the plants. And there was one woman that was very animated and very excited about talking about the plants. She was talking to everybody. And the one that she focused on was this small little garlic that happened to have sprouted. And she was talking about her family and how she grew up with the garden and what they grew and how they harvested and what they ate and so forth and so on. And I thought, oh, this is lovely. We're having this great conversation. And I turned to the director and she was in shock. So I walked over to her, I said, is everything okay? And she said, this woman never talks to anybody. She's angry all the time. And she's quiet and she just barely exists here. I can't believe that this is the same person that we see every day. And she started to video her to send it to her daughter so that the woman's daughter would see it. But it just solidified for me that plants are a great equalizer, like you said. You don't have to be a botanist, no offense, to enjoy plants and have a story about plants and have a relationship with plants. We all have it. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are about, how you grew your own plants. Some of them are about an experience, about walking through nature and being with plants. So I find this work very rewarding, and I just wanted to share that story with you. I have a million of them, but anyway, that's the one I'm going to pick.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And I think to add to that, I think everyone who works in plants or botanical or nature, however you want to term it, in some ways I feel like we're kind of blessed, if we could be religious about it. My mom, speaking of stories, well, at one point I was walking around in the nursery with my mother, and I'm pushing the cart behind her, and she's talking to one of the nurserymen, and they're talking again about how wonderful plants are, and my mom goes, "Oh yeah, they're so much better than children." And she's like, they respond. They really respond. You give them a little bit of love and look what happens. It's so evident. They really blossom, unlike children. And then the nursery guy looks at me and I'm waving. I'm like, I'm the daughter, yes. So anyway, but yes, I did inherit eventually my mom's love. At one point I remember that we were all, like, one of the worst things you could do in our household was to accidentally knock a plant over. So that was, we were definitely not allowed to water. That was not in our ability yet. But anyway, okay, so continuing on with this notion of plants and wonder, how when you get involved with them, actually your ego is cast aside, right? And wonder comes in. And there's this incredible sensory awareness, as you made so evident, right? So we get back to this, going back to smelling and hearing and touching. So I think that is this incredible thing that we've, to some degree, a lot of people in our urbanization have lost, right? So there's even that term called plant blindness, because the affliction of basically not noticing it. Like the opposite of what Daniel has, right? So there's even this quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically they say that children by a very young age can recognize some 200 designer logos, but do not know the name of the tree in front of their garden, in front of their home. And I say this to my students every semester in my environmental justice class. And in a class of 36, there's usually only 2 that can tell me the name of their tree in front of their apartment building. So I don't know about 200 logos. I think we would probably all fail the logo exam, right?
But you shouldn't pick on the kids, I think.
No,
Adults
no.
are just as bad.
Yes, totally. And maybe some of the kids are better. And again, this is about education and awareness, exactly. It's really not about the kids, it's about the society that we grow up in. And so there's this dual thing here happening, that we've got this extreme blindness, but at the same time we've got incredible, wonderful scientific discoveries, whether it's about the magnolia that was discovered in Mexico, or Daniel, your endless slew of discoveries near and far, right? And of course about plant intelligence, sending enzymes and signals, and being even benevolent to other plants. So in this time of these 2 converging realities, what do you think that we can do as individuals, as people working with communities, to extend beyond our regular jobs and our roles? Anyone want to take that? In the thinking of doing and being.
Well, on the plant blindness, yeah, I mean, one I mean, I noticed that myself once I got interested in plants and I started to study them. I found there were all these plants that I was walking past, and I would learn a plant, and then all of a sudden, you know, shepherd's purse, and then it's everywhere. You know, it's on my corner, it's coming out of the cracks in the sidewalk, it's kind of everywhere you go. So I think part of the solution is just starting that awareness. I mean, hopefully starting it early, but it can start at any time. And it also becomes a little bit addictive, I mean, at least for me. I have that sort of collector's mentality, I think, and I'm always looking at things and sort of finding things on the sidewalk, and that got transferred to plants.
Tina, maybe if you want to talk about your ecoflora.
Sure. I co-manage the project called the New York City Ecoflora Project, and it's a new effort to document the plants of New York City and to engage the entire community in that effort, because we learn from the experience here at Brooklyn and in other places that a couple of botanists can work for several years and go around and collect plants and make a list and publish that list in a scientific journal, and it will go into the library and maybe not be seen again for another 20, 30 years. And very few people will be aware of this work and support that kind of work. It's very difficult to raise money to do a flora of a particular area. And so one of our objectives in developing the New York City Ecoflora Project was to find a way to engage the community in the process, so that the community would be invested in the project, that they would have a stake in the outcome of that project, so that it would be more sustainable if the community participated in it, if they knew how it was done, if they actually helped make the project happen and participated in it, they would be more inclined to support it going into the future. So that was a desire to build a sustainable project. And also, as we all know, New York City is a very complicated place. It's a big city, 300 square miles. There are a lot of plants here, 1,500 species or so, and a couple of botanists up in the Bronx are not going to be able to document every single species in New York City, even because even if we could go out and collect every single one today, there would be new ones coming in tomorrow. So we really could not do the project without the distributed effort of the entire community. So that's how we built the project, was participation throughout the city. Luckily, there's an app that you can download for your phone, completely free, non-commercial, very easy to use, called iNaturalist, and it will even identify the plants for you. And you take a picture of a plant, upload that, and it becomes part of the New York City Ecoflora Project. So it immediately documents the plant in the place and time and the species of that plant. So to get to the question, the challenge was how to keep people interested and engaged over time. You know, we could have a workshop and bring people to the garden and teach them what we're doing and, you know, ask them to participate, and they might do it once, might go home and take a picture of a plant, and that would be the end of it until something else came along and got their attention and got them distracted on something else. A lot of distractions here in New York City. So we developed a monthly EcoQuest challenge, and this gets to the particular recognition of particular plants. And so each month we have a focus on either one plant species or a group of plants. One month we did it on the Tree of Heaven, and we had over 100 people make observations of Tree of Heaven throughout New York City, and they made I think 7,000 observations of Tree of Heaven all over the city. And by the end of the month, they had been photographing and observing these trees throughout their walks, on their daily activities. And by the end of the month, the participants could recognize a tree of heaven from a distance. They could recognize it at night. They could recognize it even when it was a tiny little seedling. At all stages of its life cycle, even after it lost all of its leaves and was just a bare tree with just a few twigs on it, they could recognize that tree. So that is we found is a very successful and way to break down that plant blindness, so that we're animals. We're naturally attuned to other animals. It takes longer for us to learn plants, but it's possible to learn the plants. But we need repetition, we need practice, and we need familiarity with these plants. And our challenge has been to engage New Yorkers, busy urban people. You think it's a concrete jungle. There aren't any plants to observe here, but in fact they're all around us, and people can learn the plants in New York City. So I encourage all of you to look at the New York City Ecoflora and participate in the EcoQuest challenges. Each month it's a different species. This month it's the lesser celandine. How many, raise of hands, how many already know that plant? In the audience, a few, maybe a small percentage. So I brought a flyer here. So I guarantee, and if you participate in the EcoQuest challenge by the end of the month, by April 1st, you will know lesser celandine in the dark, with your glasses off, or even after it starts to die down. Okay.
Yes.
I had worked a little bit on the Metropolitan Florida project, which was people actually making pressing and making botanical specimens. And I think it was based here, right?
Yes.
But that's an interesting project because the pressing is a little more difficult and technical, but this is a way people could just use their cell phone and do it like on their way to work and send it off to you. So
We
that's
all
a great
have
idea.
a supercomputer in our pocket.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
So I wanted to add that in reality, given a little incentive, I think people can really learn plant species. Because I saw it for myself. So I have a redfoot tortoise, and I bring it to the community garden so it can exercise and it can browse, and it's actually one of the best guides if you're interested in edible plants, is if you follow my tortoise. And so all the kids at the garden always like to, feed her what she likes to eat. So they immediately learned, well, she likes dandelion and she likes plantain leaves. And so they immediately have to learn the shapes of the leaves for her to eat. So, and they do it in seconds because the incentive is to watch her eat. So anyway, so what I'm hearing from everyone is words like exploration, magical relationships, addiction, right? So once it's like opened up that you notice this plant, then it's becoming this like, I say here, it's like becomes this thing that you want to do more of. So it's habit forming, and somehow you get joy from it, right? I think that's probably happening for everyone. And I just wanted to read a quote from the poetic neurologist Oliver Sacks. And he says, there are only 2 non-pharmaceutical therapies to be vitally important for patients with chronic neurological diseases. And they are, anyone want to take a guess?
Nature.
Music and gardens. Yeah. So 2 non-pharmaceutical therapies, music and gardens. So with that notion, I think I just want to segue over to this idea of what the artist felt like when you're being let loose in the library and the collections at BBG, because I feel like in some ways it's like playing. Am I correct? and being loose in a certain kind of playground. So did you want to comment about that?
Yeah, I'd originally gone to the library a bunch of years ago when I was working on this project of plants that grow in both New York City and the Arctic, and found that I could get access to the library here, which I thought was amazing, that there was a library and like just all the books that I was interested in. And that was when I originally met Kathy, and she had just taken some classes at the Center for Book Arts, where I then had a residency. So I sort of found like my people. I felt like, and there's just an amazing collection also in the library, and Kathy was super helpful.
Yeah, it was like a candy shop for me because I have a garden, so there were suddenly like I was surrounded by all these books that I could. It was actually a conflict between doing the research for the projects, the art project, and then researching planting for my garden. And then I realized that the two are really, really inextricably linked, and that my pathway in was really my relationship from childhood with plants, which is partly why I chose the magnolia. Because I grew up in the suburbs, but also in rural Connecticut, and so toward what Daniel was saying, I grew up learning all the common names of plants, and we had a garden that went back several generations. So we had plants that were my great-grandparents, and the garden was planted by my grandfather, with plants that were, some of which were brought, like peonies from China, as gifts to my great aunt. So there was this amazing lineage, and I was an only child, so they were my siblings. And I spent all my time barefoot in the woods, finding snake plant and doll's eyes and all these wood orchids, lave slippers, all of the things that are now really rare, which were to a certain extent rare then, but it was this incredible thrill to find these things growing. And I have not, other than art making and poetry writing, I haven't really found any other thrill quite like that. And even those things are not the same. There's just nothing like seeing a really special plant, or really looking at the construction of even an ordinary plant. I mean, I'm actually obsessed with weeds because I think they have the most complex, fascinating structure really of all. So yeah, this intimacy that we can have with plants, I think, is really thrilling. There's a really wonderful New York Times piece about this, the magic of nature and connecting with it. It's written by the guy who wrote How to Draw Your Dragon or something. I think it's a movie. Yeah, so it's today, and I really recommend it. It's a beautiful piece.
I'd just like to add to it that all the librarians love playing with the things in their collection. They're magical to the librarians as well. So we feel that we're extremely lucky to be able to be in this line of work.
I also think the connection with plants and books is really amazing. You know, several years ago thought that the printing of books was going to die. That people were not going to write books or publish books, books that you can hold anymore. But there's constant flow of books about plants still being produced every day. And my wife can attest to the growing library at my home, and I'm sure all of you can't help ourselves about the obsession with collecting plant books as well.
I think there's a tote bag that says something like, all you need is a library and plants, right? So there's definitely that tie with writers and the gardens and libraries, collections, because you're collecting plants and then you're collecting books. Yeah, so it's the same impulse. and somehow we take solace, right? It makes you feel more whole. So I have some more questions about this whole relationship of arts and science and the back and forth that goes between it, and then also with libraries and collections. And also you came from medicine to plants, right? Which seems to me to be very logical too. So, these days, what we learn in art school, we have some intro to drawing classes and life drawing, but it's pretty far afield from the old days when you maybe really looking at specimens, right? And I was just saying about how when my mom was studying biology in Nanjing, in the Junior College, which is the only college that women went to back then, they had to take rigorous exams that were all really essentially like drawing observation exams, and do things like, here's the bone, draw the bone that's connected to it. So it required a certain kind of memory, technical drawing skill, and really acute observation skills for someone in the sciences. So I'm thinking about, well, what's happened today in the arts, and then, recently in one of my classes for someone who does a lot of insect ID work, actually at the NYBG, he said that he was teaching at SVA, and he was teaching insect ID to the art students, and they loved it, right? Because this is something for an art student, you don't really get that. And they really felt like they were getting a lot out of it, this whole world being opened up to you. And then I had heard this other comment from someone in the, I'll just say in the green sector, in the tree sector, and he said, I just feel like artists need some kind of workshop, some kind of studies where they can start making artwork that is actually identifiable. He was sort of recanting the problem of artists being so expressive that you could no longer tell the species, right? And so I just wanted to see any comments about that, and is it really just a matter, is it more that we don't need a workshop as much as just being opened up to it, right? Because once you do open up to it, you're gonna have the magnolia-ness or the sassafras-ness for sure, right? So any comments?
Well, that was sassafras, it's a better word.
But the magnolia are so beautiful too, so you got it.
Or from the,
Well, I mean, yeah, well, a couple things. I mean, I guess so. I did the fold out accordion book, charting the whole time that I was here from winter into late spring, and so those drawings are just done, very quickly with an ink pen without any pencil sketching. They're very quick. And so that's really the core of my work practice, is to draw from life always. And again, just going back to my intimacy with plants growing up, there was a book of Leonardo drawings in the house, and I would copy those when it was bad weather, and then when it was good weather, I would go out and just make drawings. And I didn't really think of it as like drawing skills. I thought of it as meditation. It was like a way of communing or connecting or having a conversation. And I would always see things in a deeper way, and there would always be some amazing thing that would happen, like a bluebird would land above me, or a spider would drop down. There was, the time and the focus always opened up opportunity. So yeah, and just in terms of the teaching, I definitely encourage and occasionally insist my students spend time working directly from observation. It's just, the other part of it is that that the thing is, it's not gonna walk away because it's a plant, but it's going to, the light will change, your hand will get cold, something will happen to interrupt you. So there's a sense of urgency, and I think that we tend to make good art out of a sense of urgency. And partly that urgency demands a certain kind of elevated, amplified focus. And I think that that's when we get really exciting drawing happening, not from calculated work after photographs so much, for me anyway.
I attended a conference of the American Society for Botanical Artists 2 or 3 years ago, and because we have an art program here for some of the students from our high school, I went to the education session, and this topic was addressed in that there is a growing need for representational artists. It was something that had gone away for a long time, but it's come back, and one of the reasons it's come back is because of animation. So that's a very new focus, and there was a discussion amongst all the people who taught art, as they were artists, but they also taught art, as to how important that really is. And we have a program, it's our Hatch Botanical Art Program, and we have students from our base high school, which is part of the garden, participate in that over the summer, and we have an instructor that works with students along these lines.
Yeah, Sassafras. Yeah, I guess part of it is I feel like we live in such a digital image world, and what I get inspired by is the actual object. So yeah, it's sort of not knowing exactly what I'm going to do. I go out and I press, and then I can kind of discover what's useful out of that. And it just pushes me partly to do things I wouldn't do otherwise, but also just to kind of really look at the plants. And when you're pressing them, you have to really understand the structure of it and how it's going to go flat and what it's going to look like when it's all dried. So you sort of start to see in 3 dimensions, and how do you make that 3-dimensional thing into a 2-dimensional flat image. So it kind of forces this close attention on me, as well as just having that tactile feel.
I went to a conference last summer, and it was with horticultural therapists and some of the work they're doing with people with dementia. And there was this wonderful activity where they had all plant pots on the table and some big sheets of paper. And they were colorful and different shapes and different textures. And the object was to use these parts to make art, but it wasn't anything that you glued down to the paper or left on the paper. You could either move to somebody else's and add to theirs, or you can change it and start all over again. There was something very anxiety-free about doing art like that, knowing that it wasn't, anything permanent, that working with people with dementia that are very focused on right now, today, and not thinking about the future or what happened in the past, but really the impermanence of this activity was just spot on. I'm trying to figure out how to incorporate that into some of the work that we do with our groups.
Well, I had heard about plant blindness. Well, I still have bird blindness, and I'm starting to break down my insect blindness. And this, a couple of years ago, I discovered, or didn't discover, but I found the spicebush caterpillar larvae on a sassafras tree. And these butterflies, the larvae caterpillars, feed only on one family of plants in the Lauraceae, the avocado family and the laurel family. And we have some of that family that grows here, the spicebush and the sassafras tree. And this butterfly, the females lay their eggs only on these 2 species of plants in our area. That's because the caterpillars will feed on these leaves, and they ingest these compounds which protect them from predators. And the caterpillars develop from the egg on the leaf, and they'll secrete this silk on the leaf that causes it to fold up. And inside that folded leaf, the caterpillar develops. But it's not just a ordinary looking caterpillar, it's this amazing creature that's green and yellow, and it has these big eye spots in the front of the caterpillar and kind of a bulbous head. And that's to protect it from any birds that might pry open the leaf and look inside and see this creature with big eyes and think that it's a snake and fly off and leave it alone. And this caterpillar was actually the inspiration for the creator of the Pokemon Go. It was this creature, Caterpie, and this creator actually lives in Japan, and he was looking for a way to engage his children, to get them off their phone and off the computer, and to appreciate nature. And so he was scouring the natural history literature for charismatic creatures that could be characters in his creations. And somehow he found this caterpillar that only grows in the eastern United States and developed it into one of the characters in his game. But you can see the caterpillar every year from about end of May until August and even into September. You can find these caterpillars. So if you find a sassafras tree or a spice bush and look at a folded leaf, open it up, and you might see this amazing, beautiful caterpillar. So for all the artists here, don't be scared, you can find inspiration for art out there in nature, and all the colors of the rainbow are there, even just in the insect world, right here in New York City.
A follow-up on that note, I don't know if people realize, but today, March 3rd, is a very special day. Every year, this is World Wildlife Day. And I was just at the UN meeting this morning, and then later at the African Symposium. And in the past United Nations World Wildlife Day meetings, there's always a theme. So one year it was on big cats, last year was on saving the oceans, and this year is actually very, very broad. It's on sustaining life on Earth, biodiversity, and it was the first year that I kept on hearing the word flora. Never before in a wildlife United Nations meeting would you ever hear the word flora. It's always fauna. So that shows you the shift, because now it's so much about nature-based solutions and restoration projects. So things are definitely changing in the world. And what I keep on hearing from everyone is this notion of amplified focus when we're around plants, right? So you're so attuned. And then this, but at the same time, there's an impermanence, right? Because it's in that moment, in that here and now. And then also the reduction of anxiety, right? Because you really just have to be fully there. So with that in mind, and we're in such an anxiety-ridden age, right? So we see clearly that the plant, on so many multiple levels, the obvious medicinal healing, direct healing aspect, and then the more mind and body aspects of things. So I want to ask the panel, and then I'm going to open things up to the audience. So in this particular juncture, is there something that's either, and you can answer to any of these, is there something that's particularly exciting to you? Is there something that worries you? I mean, I have things that worry me, like I stay up late at night thinking about these things. Or is there something that you'd like to see more of? That we're starting to do, but maybe we could do more of. Is there anything on your wish list?
I'm very excited that there's more people who are interested in horticultural therapy and developing programs in cultural institutions for people with disabilities. I think that that's really catching on, and this is the 30th year in July for the ADA, Americans with Disability Act. So I think that that's really terrific. I would love to see the garden take one step further, because I think being in nature is wonderful and it's relaxing and it helps you decompress, and it revitalizes you. I think working with plants is another level, but I would really like to see that we have a program where people with disabilities can actually garden here. So that's my hope for this year.
Yeah, I think the focus on a particular place is very exciting to me. The history of a place, the biodiversity of a place, the cultural aspects of a particular place, and I think we all live in a neighborhood somewhere in New York City, and our lives are spent in particular places, and I think we could think more about what that place was like before we came here, and how we could restore some of the history and some of the biodiversity of the particular places where we live. And I think that will go a long way toward ameliorating some of the grave threats that we face. Is that, it's not that the Africans have to stop doing this, or everybody else needs to do something. We all need to take responsibility for the places where we live and restore those communities. And I think that will also help us to work together more as a community, and be more mindful of where we live and our impact on the place where we live.
I think I would like to see us have more time and space to be in, and that's one of the things that we do try to offer in the library. And I think that connects a lot to what you were saying about place. One of the things that people look for when they come to the library often, and Maddie and I had this discussion a little, so they want to know what plant only grows in Brooklyn. That plant doesn't exist, I don't think. But there is this searching for the specificity of place, and I guess I look for us to have a lot of time for reflecting on that.
I feel like my wish list is about as long as a 5-year-old's for Christmas. But I guess for me the primary thing would be, I worry most about habitat loss. I worry about that much more than global warming and climate change. So I guess my big wish would be, in any way possible, for us to set aside more and more and more land protected, not developed. Great example is the big building they want to put towering over these gardens here, forgetting that we need light to grow. So that, and then I guess the other thing, I'm such a big picker-upper, wherever I go, I take garbage bags around with me, and I'm a big bore to take a vacation with, because you end up cleaning up beaches with big trash bags. So I guess I would love to see an initiative where everybody really just did that, I took the train a couple days ago to Westchester, and the whole Sawmill River is just strewn with trash. So that's my spring project, and I can enjoy the lesser celandine, aka marsh marigolds, that grow there in wild profusion. So if you want to join me and see them all blooming, it's a great way to not only have a really intimate connection with plants, but also to feel like you're contributing in some way. It's such a simple thing to do, and it makes you feel better. It really does, and then you can recycle the stuff too.
One positive thing that I see happening, and I would hope would continue, is people planting plants for birds and for butterflies. And my attention has for a long time has been pulled from plants. I get really into plants, but I'm also very into birds. And that's one place where things come together. And it's so easy, you don't have to stop global warming or, you know, world hunger or anything. Anybody can plant things in their backyard or even on the sidewalk, native plants that are attractive for the insects and for birds and butterflies. So, I mean, I see that starting to happen, maybe partly just because I'm focused on birds and I see people reporting on it. But I hope that continues.
So I just wanted to add that it's really clear that when you have a relationship with plants, you have a different relationship with time, right? Because plants make you slow down, you have to be really observant, and then in the growing process you understand seasons, right? And changes and all the nuances of overwatering and underwatering and disease and things like that. I also wanted to make note of this whole relationship to history. And just comment on, we have such incredible resources these days. If you think about the Manhattan Project, the Wallachia Project, that we can even go and put in an address and you can find out the exact flora and fauna that was at that time in the 1600s, well not the exact, but they approximate to be in the 1600s. And what I feel like is we've got all these tools, right? And we're getting more and more. And part of the issue is the ability to imagine, right? Because I do this with my students. We go and we look at, okay, what was there before? And then when it comes to, there's this other tool where you can imagine the future, right? So Eric Sanderson has like the companion tool where you can put in what is the New York of the future and can it be restored? Can we have not just the extremes, but can we have a lot more green on the roofs? And he has often commented about how even among the landscape architects and the horticulturists, they're very hesitant. At the most, they'll put like a little green roof there, a little bit of that, and it's like this lack of daring, or, I mean, this is just you're not actually changing New York City, you know, jurisdiction or laws or anything like that. You're just imagining, but everyone's on the hesitant side, right? So I think that that's one of the issues, is that to be even daring to imagine, right? To go that route of, what about if we were to do this or that? And there is so much out there that's so positive, with the green roof legislature that went out of new buildings. With also the bird glass legislature as well. But there is, again, there's so much work to be done. And I just wanted to make this comment about the birding and the plants. So I took my environmental justice class, which is a very, you know, these are CUNY students in their 20s. And I got the top youngest birder, Jeffrey Ward, who's, if you know about him and Young Birders, his film just won an award. So he was a Bronx kid that grew up actually in homeless shelters and is self-taught. Him and his brother are considered some of the youngest top birders out there. And so I didn't tell my students too much prep. I just said we're going in migration time, we're going to Central Park, and I didn't prep them about what you should wear or do or not do. And Jeffrey said to me the other day, he's like, oh no, you shouldn't prep them, just let them be as they are, as natural as can be. And then they would scream suddenly like, red bird, red bird, at the cardinal. Meanwhile, Jeffrey was pointing to like some very, you know, exotic European species that was just coming through during migration. And they missed all of that. So anyway, it was, I felt like it was a little bit of a learning lesson, but Jeffrey was like, no. He's like, your class was the funniest class I have ever had. Because usually, you know, birding can get very competitive, and everyone's about the list, and like, and he was like all worried because that morning they had seen like 45 species, and everyone's like, what are you going to see this afternoon? Can you top that list? And here my class was the whole other, you know, spectrum of things. And he's like, no, they may not be birders, but they got something out of it. And I think that's really true. They really did, in this other kind of way, get something out of being in Social Park in a different context and being in the more wild part, and then just seeing, like, experiencing, you know, another Bronx kid, another, you know, they were even at one point, they're like, why do you like the Bronx? What's good about the Bronx? Right? So it's becoming this whole other thing, but I think it was actually really important for them. And later on, some of my students have come up to me and said, you know, that the trip really was important to them. It just didn't come out in the obvious way. So I think it's, for us urbanites, we really do have to get out there. So now I'm gonna open it up to the audience for questions. Anyone? Yeah.
Yeah, you said the artists did this research in libraries, and then they produced something. What were the steps that got from the book to the product? What was the process that, well, fine, you read the book, what does that have to do with what you did?
You could repeat the question too for listeners who didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, you'd asked what the process was from the research to the final product. For me, I was already interested in Sassafras, and so I was finding it and pressing it. And so when I started on the research, it was sort of trying to find what the history of it was. And usually what I do is combine image and text. So a lot of my research was finding things that I thought summed up, you know, either the experience of those explorers, people finding it, people trying to sell it, or people writing on what the medicinal qualities of it were, what it could cure. And then kind of taking those quotes and I traced them and put them along with pressed plants. So that was kind of the process. Yeah.
I missed the first part of your talk, but I'm curious, can you say something about how sassafras is good for skin?
Yeah, it was used, I mean, the Native Americans, a lot of what the early people learned was from the Native Americans. They used it for a lot of different things, all different parts of the sassafras, but one of them was treating skin disorders like acne and things like that. They would just mash it up and apply it. They also applied it to wounds, but they used it as a tea. They used, you know, the Creole filet that thickens the gumbo is the dried leaves, and the Native Americans used it that same way, putting it in soups. It's very gummy, and it just is sort of a natural thickener. Yeah.
So how do we tie that to the science? Has any research been done that proves that sassafras is good for the skin? And, you know, what, from what we know about the folk remedies, how has that escalated up into the science world? Maybe that's a question for
Yeah, a lot of it isn't good, but certain things, I mean, sassafras in particular, I mean, it's actually illegal, like the derivative of it is illegal now because the chemicals in it can be used to make MDMA, which is ecstasy, and people do use it that way. Usually things that are from Asia, not like our sassafras, but you could derive that MDMA from the sassafras that we have.
And sassafras was used to make a tea from the roots. It has a very aromatic, very unique flavor, and was the first plant to make root beer out of. That's why it's called root beer. And in the 1930s or 40s, I believe, when they were able to synthesize the active compound in the sassafras, they fed massive quantities of that to rats, and the rats developed kidney cancer. So the USDA banned the selling of sassafras. So you can't buy it anywhere. That's why it's not a commercial product, because this isolated compound in massive quantities can cause cancer. And, you know, it's just totally ridiculous, because in the you know, plants are naturally quite variable, so in any population of plants, the amount of that compound might vary, and we don't consume the plant in a pure form, that compound in a pure form anyway. We're drinking it with water and other ingredients. But yet we can have trace amounts of these noxious chemicals in our environment, and they say, oh, well, you know, a tiny amount is not dangerous for you. You know, so it's a very,
Not get sassafras in a tea bag anymore.
no, you cannot buy that, no.
I miss sassafras.
Yeah, oh, it's a wonderful, have you had sassafras tea?
Well, yeah, but you know, I've bought it in spice stores. I've also read that it's illegal, so I don't know how that comes together. It's good. It makes a good tea. You know, it tastes sort of like root beer.
Roland Miro sang about sassafras and some blues as a song.
Oh, really?
Nickname or something.
Oh, okay.
She has a reference in there about sassafras. And
But it
moonshine.
oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, it was a traditional thing, and particularly in the South,
Yes.
as a cold tea and also as a hot tea. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to open up with, I guess, maybe a reflection or a comment, of just acknowledging that we're on Lenape land, which obviously, you know, was the people that work here had rich relationships with botany and plant medicine. So I was surprised by the lack of acknowledgement, I guess.
Well, I mentioned Manhattan and Willie.
Right, but just the integration of, or representation of generally, not as a criticism, just a general reflection, I think is important. And secondary is the field of biomimicry, and if you guys have integrated that into your work, so it's the only practical field I've come across that bridges plant intelligence or natural intelligence with the applications to the real world. So it emulates the strategies of nature. And I'm just curious if that's been kind of coming across in your work.
I'm glad you brought up the Native Americans. Thank you for that. And I think that's part of what I was getting at with the emphasis of place. You know, if you look back far enough, you will find that there were people here before, you know, Europeans came. And they had a history, they had a whole culture based on this particular place. And so if we really want to look at this place, we will have to, eventually we'll find that history and that culture and the plants that they depended on. You know, they, Native Americans lived here for probably 10,000 years, and you know, when Europeans came, they found a paradise. And how was it that people were able to live here for 10,000 years and preserve paradise? And we screwed it up in, you know, 200 years. Pretty amazing. But biomimicry is one thing that the Europeans did when they came here was, you know, they didn't have, they have sophisticated mineralogical, geological techniques. They took a shortcut and they looked for particular trees in an area, and if they saw, you know, like a pumpkin ash or poplar trees or willow trees, they knew that the ground was going to flood, and they didn't put their farms there or their homes there. But when they found hickory trees and oak trees, they knew that that was dry ground, and it was also neutral soil. It was not too acid and it was not too basic. So these forests that the Native Americans had preserved here for thousands of years were sort of mined by the Europeans, came and they recognized that these particular trees indicated the soil conditions and that those were good places to put their farms. So unfortunately they cut down those trees and, you know, plowed it up and planted corn, which they also got from the Native Americans.
So, I think we have one more question, and then we're also being told that we have to wrap it up. I just want to end really quickly with a note of, sure. You know, everyone uses the term biodiversity loss, and I don't know if you noticed in the opening statement, I said biocultural diversity loss. And that is one of the biggest issues. You know, at the big climate change summits this past fall, at the Indigenous Peoples Summit, which I attended, it was really, really tragic because it was one of the largest UN rooms and it was nearly empty. The reason being that the indigenous peoples of 7 continents did not get visas, so they couldn't come in. So here it is, the UNDP, all the Sustainable Development Goals that the entire, that we're all supposed to be aiming for. One of them includes, acknowledging indigenous knowledge. And one of the things that came up was the reality of, well, 2 things. One is that at the same point you do have ecocide and genocide going on, so indigenous peoples are in the forefront of being environmental heroes and also being murdered. And then the other aspect of it is that climate change has gotten to the point, and deforestation to the point, where indigenous knowledge cannot combat, the indigenous knowledge about fires. It cannot combat the scale of wildfires that are happening, for example, in Australia. So that is, the current situation of where we are today. And I think that that's really critical that people not say biodiversity loss, but biocultural, because you have to put people and the flora and fauna all together, and then you actually can get something done. Once we're all in there together, then I think there's a lot of work that can be done. So with communities. So I know that they want us to wrap it up, so we can all chat and mingle and have more conversations. Thank you so much.
I'm Jonathan Secor, I'm Director of Public Programs here. I want to give a huge thanks to Maddie, to the artists, to the panelists. A really great evening.